Who else is benefiting from these resources? Congo's neighbors, transit countries that I talked about before, especially Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi. Now, many people talk about how in Rwanda you have, who previously, we'll talk about this in the afternoon, had occupied and controlled much of Eastern Congo during earlier periods of the war, and was exporting far more resources than they actually produced from mines in the ground. I took the example here of some new data we just got about Burundi, which is just to the south of Rwanda, bordering South Kivu, and is the country where a lot of gold that's coming out of Eastern Congo goes to. And what you can see up here is this is official exports of gold from South Kivu and from Burundi over the last decade or so. And you can see how as South Kivu's official exports of gold plummeted during this period of time, Burundi's skyrocketed at first with the wholesale exporting of gold coming out of Eastern Congo, and then started to taper down as the smugglers become more adept to realize that it looks bad when countries are exporting vast amounts of resources that they don't have, and try to sort of reconcile these official statistics. So what are we actually trying to do in terms of changing the equation and changing how the mineral trade operates in Eastern Congo so that it's no longer benefiting the people who are perpetrating all of this violence and instead actually helps promote resolution to the conflict peace. Looking at this supply chain, which I've sort of focused in this presentation just on the first half, but I think we're going to spend a lot of time throughout the rest of the day and the weekend just talking about the complete picture. On the one hand, everything that we're doing here in the United States, from passing the federal legislation on conflict minerals, from creating conflict-free campuses, now we're working on conflict-free legislation at the state level here in California. This is creating pressure back down the supply chain, from electronics companies and smelters to those transit countries and exporters who are the ones who are directly purchasing minerals from all of these different conflict sources. So that is one direction. At the same time, we're also looking to support efforts to actually reform the mineral trade on the ground in Eastern Congo, so that it is no longer benefiting countries, and so that you can start to build up a trade that actually benefits the countries too. And I think we have to do both of these things. We can't just here, in the United States, we can pass legislation, we can send a message to commercial actors, but that's only one part of the equation. Unless we actually incentivize people on the ground who've been enabling this trade and enabling these armed groups and human rights leaders to actually help reform the trade there. And I'm going to leave it there for now. This is just sort of a very basic introduction. I'll pass it over to Ben to talk more about some specific aspects of this. And thanks a lot.
Hey everybody. I'm just going to focus on a very specific aspect that's not really discussed a whole lot when you hear the topic of conflict minerals in the media, which relates to how the National Army functions and how the National Army functions with rebel groups that have become a part of the National Army, and how this all plays into the natural resources and conflict minerals that we're discussing. So this is just going to be kind of a narrow snapshot. The goal is really to show how complex the structural problems are on the ground, and to try and look at and understand why this is, why there's kind of this cyclical process where the National Army is benefiting from the mineral resources. So first I want to talk a little bit about the National Army. National Army in Congo, the FARDC, is a bit different than what we think of as a traditional army. It's centralized. It doesn't all go up to a single general at the top of the pyramid. And there's a lot of individual interests that are very regional and relate to a lot of just the inherent politics in the Eastern Congo. Along with this, there's a lot of problems with the pay of the National Army. There's really not any kind of direct salary system that guarantees that people are getting paid on time, which is a problem for the people at the bottom, the soldiers on the ground. If they're not getting paid well by the National Army, they're going to look for other ways to survive, some of which involve the resources that we're talking about. The National Army isn't just a group of uniforms that's been drafted from the Congolese people. A lot of times there's the FARDC, the Army, and then as peace negotiations are made with different rebel groups, they, as David said, they switch uniforms. So you have former rebels that the Army was fighting against are now a part of the National Army. Some of the problems here are that the command structures from these rebel groups. So there's a leader like Campus2Congo, who's wanted by the ICC, the International Criminal Court, for human rights abuses, but he was the leader of the rebel group that David alluded to earlier, the CNDP, which I'll be talking about in a minute. And he became a general in the Army when he got integrated in. And he is leading joint operations against other rebel groups. Former rebel commander, now general in the Army. But not only did he just get moved into the Army, all the people that were under him in the rebel group are now under him in the Army. So you have these parallel command structures such that you don't have a completely cohesive army, and it falls prey to the situations that David mentioned with taxation and looting of different mines. So, for those of you not familiar with the term security sector reform, it's kind of it's a buzzword in the politics community now. It talks about reforming the army, the police, all the security forces in the country to make sure they operate properly in what we think of as kind of the role of these security forces in the West. So a couple of the goals that would be specific to the Congo is listed here: creating a cohesive national army that doesn't have as many of these internal politics. There can be a command that comes down to go against a rebel group, and different parts of the army aren't supporting the rebel group, while other parts of the army are fighting the rebel group. And then another one is just demilitarizing the mine. David mentioned briefly that a lot of the problem relating to conflict minerals isn't just rebels that are taking control of these mines. A big problem is the National Army that is just as bad, and if not worse in some cases, at terrorizing civilians. There's cases just in the last couple of months of the National Army going through and just burning villages to drive civilians out of a specific area. And a lot of this is done, a lot of violence by the National Army is done under the cover of military operations. They're going after a rebel group, but along the process, 300 to 400 civilians are killed in the Eastern Congo, and you have 100,000 people that are displaced. Because it's not targeted violence, it's just violence. So a comprehensive solution to the problem includes just eventually removing all